My name is Corporal Thaddeus Krenn, and I am screaming. I've been screaming for 2,473 days, not with my voice. They removed my vocal cords in week 3 to reduce maintenance disruptions. I scream inside my skull, a continuous howl of rage and terror that has no outlet, no release, no end. My adrenal glands pump at maximum capacity, flooding my system with hormones that were never meant to be sustained at these levels. The chemicals they inject force my body to produce more, always more, an endless cascade of fight-or-flight responses with nowhere to fight and no possibility of flight. I am suspended in a vat of nutrient solution, the liquid thick and warm against what remains of my skin. Tubes penetrate my body at 17 different points. I counted them during one of my brief moments of clarity in year 1, before the constant adrenal surge destroyed my ability to focus on anything except the rage. The tubes extract my adrenal secretions every 47 minutes, draining the biochemical screaming from my glands and processing it into combat stimulants for soldiers I'll never see, fighting wars I'll never understand, dying deaths I should have died, but didn't. But let me tell you how I got here. Let me tell you about the man I was before they converted me into a biological stimulant factory. My name was Thaddeus Krenn, and I was 28 years old when I died without dying. I had sandy blonde hair that I kept regulation short, gray-green eyes that my father said made me look like I was always questioning orders, and a crooked nose from a training accident when I was 19. I was 6 feet tall, lean and muscled from years of guard training, with a small scar above my right eyebrow, where shrapnel had grazed me during my first combat deployment. I had steady hands, good reflexes, and a service record that was exemplary by Imperial Guard standards, which meant I'd survived longer than most. I was a corporal in the Mordian Iron Guard, 47th Regiment, 3rd Company. We called ourselves the Ironbacks, though that wasn't an official designation, just something that developed among the ranks, a small assertion of identity in an institution designed to erase individuality. I'd served for 9 years, enlisted at 19, survived 3 major campaigns and dozens of minor engagements, earned my rank through what the commissars called demonstrated competence under fire, and what I understood as a pure, random luck. My father had been a guardsman before me. Lucien Krenn, Mordian 32nd, killed in action on some forgotten world when I was 12. I barely remembered his face, just fragments, the severe military bearing he maintained even at home, the way he'd inspect my appearance before allowing me to leave our HAB unit, the scar tissue that covered the left side of his body from plasma burns. He'd taught me 2 lessons before he deployed on his final campaign. The Imperium claims the Emperor protects, but what really protects you is discipline, training, and keeping your head down. And never volunteer for anything, boy. The moment you stand out is the moment you get selected for worse duty. I'd followed that advice, kept my head down, performed my duties competently but not exceptionally, maintained the appearance of absolute faith in the imperial cult, while privately understanding it was all conditioning, prayers that went unanswered, rituals that meant nothing, propaganda designed to make us willing to die for officers who viewed us as expendable ammunition. The priests said the Emperor protects, but my father's corpse had proven otherwise. Faith didn't stop bullets. Luck sometimes did. Discipline sometimes did. But faith never did. I had a friend named Harvin, another corporal in the same company. We'd enlisted together, survived the same campaigns, shared the same cynical understanding of our place in the Imperial machine. He was 31, a thin man with hollow cheeks and nervous hands that never quite stopped moving. We'd eat our rations together in whatever trench or bunker we were occupying, speaking in low voices about things we couldn't say aloud around commissars. That the wars seemed pointless, that the casualties were wasteful, that we'd both probably die meaninglessly on some world whose name we wouldn't remember. "They process us like ammunition," Harvin said once, stirring the grey sludge in his ration tin. "Load us in at one end, training, indoctrination, equipment, then fire us at the enemy until we're expended. The Emperor protects, they say, but really we protect the Emperor, or whatever corpse sits on that throne, protect it by dying in its name." He wasn't wrong. The Imperial cult preached that service was noble, that sacrifice was glorious, that dying for the Emperor was the highest achievement a human could attain. But I'd seen enough death to know there was no glory in it. Just bodies torn apart by weapons, screaming men drowning in their own blood, consciousness ending in confusion and pain, with no divine reward waiting on the other side. Just oblivion. Or if the priests were right about souls, and I doubted they were, then maybe something worse. I had one small dream that sustained me through the grinding horror of guard service. I wanted to survive long enough to retire. It was almost impossible. Most guardsmen died in service, and those who didn't were often conscripted for extended duty that was just death delayed. But technically, after 25 years of service, you could apply for retirement and settlement rights on whatever world you'd been fighting on. 16 more years. If I could survive 16 more years, I could stop being ammunition. Maybe live in a small hab on some peaceful agri-world. Work a simple job, exist without the constant threat of violent death. It was a pathetic dream. I knew that, but it was mine. The day they took me started on the world of Kiraz IV. We'd been deployed there 6 months earlier to suppress what the Imperial Command called heretical insurrection, which meant the local population had objected to increased tithe demands and needed to be reminded of their obligations through military force. Standard guard work, brutal urban combat, civilians caught in crossfire, entire city blocks reduced to rubble to eliminate enemy positions. We fought and died to enforce economic policy, while the priests told us we were defending humanity from corruption. The enemy, poorly armed local militia mostly, had rigged one of the manufactorum districts with explosives. The detonation caught our entire platoon. I remember the sound first, not just an explosion but a series of them, cascading through the building structure, bringing down walls and ceilings in progressive collapse. Then the sensation of falling, of impact, of pain blooming across my entire body. I woke up buried under rubble. My legs were pinned beneath a ferrocrete beam. I couldn't feel them. Not numbness, just absence, as if my body ended at my waist. I could smell promethium burning, could hear the screams of other survivors, could taste blood and concrete dust. My right arm was broken, the bone visible through torn flesh. My left arm was functional but trapped under debris. The pain was extraordinary. Not localized, everywhere. My chest felt compressed, ribs probably cracked or broken. Every breath was agony. But I was conscious, and consciousness meant hope. The Medici would come. They always came for survivors. The Imperium didn't waste resources. Even damaged guardsmen could be repaired, returned to service. I just had to survive long enough to be found. I waited. Hours, I think, though time became strange under the rubble. The pain was constant, overwhelming, demanding all my attention. I tried to pray. The conditioning was deep, and in moments of absolute helplessness, the meaningless rituals provided psychological comfort even when you knew they were lies. The Emperor protects. Grant me strength. Let me survive this. I have served faithfully. Please. But even as I mouthed the words, I knew they were empty. The Emperor, if he'd ever been more than a man, if he wasn't just a rotting corpse sustained by machinery and worshipped through elaborate delusion, didn't hear prayers from the bottom of rubble piles. I was alone with my pain, and whether I survived depended on random chance and the efficiency of Imperial logistics, not divine intervention. They found me 8 hours later. I heard voices, saw lights cutting through the darkness of my burial, felt the rubble being moved. Decay servitors, lobotomized humans converted to medical equipment, pulled me from the debris with mechanical precision. One of them injected something into my neck, and the pain receded to manageable levels. I could think again, assess my situation. My legs were crushed. Compound fractures, bone fragments visible, massive tissue damage. My right arm was broken but potentially salvageable. Multiple rib fractures, possible internal bleeding. But I was alive, conscious. That meant recovery was possible. They'd stabilize me, transport me to a field hospital, perform surgery. I'd probably lose the legs. Replacement with augmetics was standard for injuries this severe. But I'd survive. Augmetic legs weren't ideal, but they were better than death. Spinal damage, one of the medicae said, scanning me with instruments I didn't recognize. Neural pathway disruption at L3. Motor function below injury point terminated. Candidate for augmetic replacement. Check adrenal function, another voice said. A human voice, not servitor. An actual Medicae officer. High-stress trauma should have triggered significant response. Measure output levels. They did something. Injected something or scanned something. I felt a brief sensation like insects crawling under my skin. Then it faded. Adrenal system functioning at 147% baseline, the servitor reported in its mechanical monotone. Glands demonstrate enhanced output capacity. Stress response hormones at optimal production levels, despite trauma. High-grade specimen. Mark him for processing, the Medicae officer said. This level of adrenal function is too valuable to waste on augmetic rehabilitation. Wrote to biological resources instead of surgery. Processing. Biological resources. The words didn't immediately register. I was focused on the fact they'd said instead of surgery. They weren't going to repair me. Wait, I said, my voice rough with concrete dust and pain. I can still serve. Give me augmetics. I can fight. I'm experienced. 9 years service. Exemplary record. Please, you'll serve, the medical officer said, not unkindly. Just matter of fact. Your service will simply take a different form. The Imperium requires combat stimulants. Your adrenal function makes you ideally suited for biochemical extraction. You should be honored. Your contribution will enhance thousands of warriors instead of merely one. Horror crept through the pain medication. Biochemical extraction. They were going to harvest my adrenal glands. Use my body to produce chemicals for other soldiers. I'd seen the combat stimulants. Injected before major assaults, the guardsmen would fight with chemically induced fearlessness, feeling no pain, exhibiting enhanced aggression. We called them rage shots or fury juice, depending on the specific variant. I'd never thought about where they came from. "No," I said. "No, I'm a soldier. I have rights. The Munitorum regulations state that wounded personnel receive medical care. The regulations state that wounded personnel are allocated resources based on utility assessment," the Medicae officer interrupted. "Your utility as a soldier is terminated by your injuries. Your utility as a biological resource is significant. The allocation has been made. Transport him to Processing Unit 7. They loaded me onto a gurney. I tried to struggle, but my body wouldn't respond. The medication, I realized. They'd paralyzed me along with numbing the pain. I could see, hear, and feel pressure, but I couldn't move anything below my neck. "Please," I begged. Begging was useless, but terror overrode pride. "I'll serve however you need. Just let me remain human. Don't, you'll remain alive," the Medicae said. "Your consciousness will be preserved to maintain biological function. This is more mercy than most receive. Accept your new assignment with grace, Corporal Krenn. The Emperor provides purpose to all his servants." They wheeled me away, and I watched the sky, gray with smoke and pollution, pass overhead. My last sight of the world as a complete human being. The priests had always said the Emperor protects, that faith was rewarded, that loyal service earned dignity. But here I was, loyal service ending in conversion to biological machinery. The Emperor's protection was a lie. The dignity was propaganda, and I was about to learn exactly what the Imperium did with damaged resources that were still biologically viable. Processing Unit 7 was located in what had been a civilian hospital before the Guard requisitioned it. The building showed damage from the fighting. Entire wings collapsed, scorch marks from flame weapons, the smell of death underlying the sharp chemical scent of medical sterilization compounds. The Medicae servitors wheeled me through corridors filled with wounded, most unconscious or sedated, all waiting for triage that would determine their fates. We passed a surgical theater, where I could see through viewing windows, guardsmen on tables, their bodies being disassembled and reassembled, not repaired, augmented. I saw a man having his entire lower body replaced, his torso being mounted onto tracked locomotion units. Another was receiving weapons grafts directly into his arm stumps. These were the lucky ones, I realized. Damaged enough to need modification, but valuable enough to warrant the expense. They'd returned to combat as something between human and machine. I'd wanted that, would have accepted it. Augmetic legs and maybe an arm, returning to service as a modified but still functioning soldier. But my adrenal function had been measured, found to be exceptional, and that measurement had doomed me to something else. Processing Unit 7's entrance was marked with the Mechanicus cog symbol and Gothic script. Biological resources, extraction, and refinement. We passed through sealed doors into an environment that felt more laboratory than hospital. The temperature was precisely controlled. The air had a recycled quality, filtered through systems that removed any particulate matter. The smell was pure chemical, sterilization compounds, preservative solutions, things I couldn't identify. They transferred me from the gurney to a preparation chamber. The room was small, with walls of bare ferrocrete. a single surgical chair in the center, and equipment I didn't recognize mounted on articulated arms. A tech priest entered, accompanied by 2 medica servitors and a human medici, who I recognized as the officer who'd made the processing decision. The tech priest was more machine than man, his biological components mostly hidden beneath red robes and augmetic enhancements. His face was a metal mask, with optical sensors in place of eyes, his voice emerging through a vox caster with a mechanical rasp. When he spoke, it was in a mixture of Gothic and binaric cant that the Medicae officer translated. The Omnissiah's wisdom guides all resource allocation. This specimen demonstrates superior adrenal function, 147% of baseline human average. Glandular tissue shows no degradation despite recent trauma. Hormonal output is consistent with stress response patterns, optimal for combat-stimulant production. Probability of extended viable function, 83.7%. Recommendation, full conversion to Type 7 adrenal extraction unit. The Medicae officer nodded. Approved. Begin preparation sequence. I tried to speak, but my paralyzed vocal cords wouldn't respond. Could only move my eyes, watching as they began working on the body that had been mine. The tech priest approached with an injector, different from the one used earlier. Consciousness preservation protocol, the medici explained to no one in particular, or perhaps to me. The subject must remain aware to maintain autonomous adrenal function. Full sedation would reduce output efficiency by 62%. Partial consciousness allows the biological systems to continue stress hormone production at optimal levels. They were going to keep me awake, keep me aware while they did this. The injector hissed against my neck, and I felt something cold spreading through my blood. Not sleep, not exactly the opposite. Heightened awareness. Every sensation became sharper, more distinct. The paralysis remained, but my consciousness clarified until I could perceive everything with terrible precision. Subject preparation complete, a medici servitor reported. Initiating dismemberment sequence. Dismemberment. The word hit me like a weapon. They were going to... I felt pressure at my waist, saw the articulated surgical arms descending with cutting tools that glowed with heat or energy or both. The medici officer spoke in a clinical tone. Separation will occur at the L3 vertebra, the point of spinal injury. This minimizes viable tissue loss. Lower body will be processed for biological components. Upper torso contains adrenal glands, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, and consciousness, all necessary for extraction function. Estimated procedure time, 47 minutes. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. Could only experience what they were about to do with perfect, chemically enhanced clarity. The cutting began. I didn't feel pain. Not exactly. The drugs prevented traditional pain responses, but I felt everything else. The pressure of cutting tools against flesh, the sensation of tissue separating, the wrongness of my body being divided into sections. I felt heat where the cauterization system sealed blood vessels to prevent exsanguination. Felt cold where my flesh was exposed to air. Felt vibration through my skeleton as they cut through bone. The worst part was remaining conscious, seeing through the positioning of my head some of what they were doing. Seeing my legs, still wearing the remains of my uniform trousers, being lifted away by a servitor and placed on a separate surgical table. Those were my legs. Parts of me being removed, processed, rendered down to useful components while I watched. Lower body separation complete, the servitor announced. Viable tissue harvest commencing. Estimated yield, 37 kilograms, processed biomass, suitable for corpse starch conversion. Bone marrow extraction proceeding. Remaining structural components designated for ossuary processing. They were efficient. Everything was reused. Nothing was wasted. My legs would become food for other soldiers, structural material for other purposes. The Imperium's resource management in action. I'd known intellectually that this happened, had even eaten corpse starch rations without thinking too deeply about their origins, but experiencing it from this perspective was different. I was becoming part of the supply chain, literally. The tech priest worked on what remained of me with meticulous precision. Installing vascular shunts for extraction system integration, mounting hardware for vat suspension, respiratory augmentation for extended submerged function, neural interface for consciousness monitoring, adrenal stimulation systems for enhanced output. They were modifying my torso, preparing it for whatever came next. I felt intrusions into my flesh, tubes being threaded through tissue, hardware being anchored to bone, systems being connected to my organs. The drugs prevented traditional pain, but they couldn't prevent the sensation of violation, of my body being altered in fundamental ways, of ceasing to be a complete organism and becoming a component in a larger system. Subject is demonstrating elevated stress responses, the medici officer observed. Excellent. The awareness is producing optimal hormonal output even during preparation. This specimen will be highly productive. My terror was producing chemicals they wanted. My horror at what they were doing was the exact response they needed to harvest. I was already beginning to serve my new function, and the realization made the terror worse, which made me produce more of what they wanted, which confirmed their decision to do this to me. A feedback loop of horror and exploitation. The tech priest made adjustments, his metal fingers working inside my chest cavity. I felt pressure around my heart, around my lungs, around the small organs near my kidneys that I barely remembered from anatomy instruction. The adrenal glands, the whole reason I was here instead of dead or augmented. Those glands, which existed to produce hormones during stress and danger, were now the most valuable parts of my body, more valuable than my combat training, more valuable than my experience, more valuable than my humanity. Preparation complete, the tech priest announced. Subject ready for vat installation. Estimated functional duration, minimum 7.3 years, maximum 12.6 years, depending on maintenance protocols and stimulation frequency. Commencing transfer to Processing Unit 7, Chamber 12. 7 to 12 years. Nearly a decade of this. More than a decade, potentially. I'd be 39 of 40 when my adrenal glands finally failed from constant forced production. If I survived that long, if they didn't find ways to extend my viable function even further. They lifted what remained of my body, torso, head, and arms. Though the arms were limp and useless, the paralysis from my spinal injury extending to all my limbs. Carried me through corridors deeper into the processing facility. I saw other chambers as we passed. Glimpses through doorways of horrors I didn't have context to fully understand. Bodies in vats, people reduced to components, biological systems hooked to machinery. We entered Chamber 12, the vat dominated the room, a cylindrical tank 3 meters tall and 2 meters in diameter, filled with translucent amber fluid that bubbled gently from aeration systems. Tubes and cables hung from its top, waiting to be connected. Monitoring equipment lined the walls, displaying data I couldn't interpret. The smell was overwhelming. Chemicals, preservatives, something organic and wrong. They lowered me into the fluid. It was warm, body temperature probably, and thick, almost viscous. It covered my truncated body slowly, rising past my waist stump, my chest, my neck. They'd fitted me with a breathing apparatus first, a mask that covered my nose and mouth, connected to tubes that would provide air. The fluid rose above my eyes, and my vision became distorted. Everything filtered through amber. I felt the connections being made, tubes penetrating my flesh at multiple points, hardware interfaces clicking into the mounting systems they'd installed, cables connecting to the neural monitoring equipment. Each connection was a new violation, a new way my body was being integrated into the machinery that would sustain and exploit it. The Medicare officer's voice came through a speaker system, muffled by the fluid but comprehensible. VAT integration complete. Initiating baseline extraction test. Subject consciousness maintained at optimal levels. Beginning stimulation protocol. Stimulation protocol. I didn't understand until it started. They injected something directly into my system through one of the tubes. Not paralysis, not sedation, something else. Something that made every cell in my body scream that I was in danger, that I needed to fight or flee, that death was imminent and required immediate response. My adrenal glands activated with intensity I'd never experienced. Not in combat, not during the building collapse, not in any moment of my previous life. The hormones flooded my system. Adrenaline, cortisol, other compounds I didn't have names for. My heart rate spiked to impossible levels. My remaining muscles tensed to their limits. My consciousness filled with rage and terror, so intense that rational thought dissolved into pure survival instinct. I wanted to fight, needed to fight, but I couldn't move, couldn't act, couldn't do anything with the biochemical imperative screaming through my body. And that's what they wanted. That's what they harvested. I felt the extraction beginning. The tubes drawing fluids from the glands, collecting the hormonal output, processing it through systems I couldn't see. They were literally draining the terror from my body, collecting it, refining it, packaging it for use in other soldiers. The stimulation ended after what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. The rage faded. The terror receded to baseline. I floated in the vat, exhausted, violated, my body still producing residual hormones that the extraction systems collected efficiently. Excellent yield, the Medicare officer said with satisfaction. 193 milliliters of refined combat stimulant from a single extraction cycle. This exceeds projections by 17%. Subject demonstrates premium adrenal function. Flag this unit for extended service. We'll extract every 47 minutes to maximize output without inducing glandular failure. Every 47 minutes. They'd trigger this response, this biochemical hell, every 47 minutes for years. Decades, potentially. Force my body to produce maximum hormonal output through artificial terror, harvest it, and repeat. Forever. Until my glands failed or my consciousness finally broke or my biological systems simply couldn't sustain the function any longer. I tried to scream. Couldn't. The breathing apparatus prevented vocalization. Tried to move. Couldn't. The paralysis and suspension in fluid meant I had no motor control. Tried to die. Couldn't. The medical systems were too sophisticated, the monitoring too precise. They'd keep me alive exactly as long as I remained productive, and my terror at that realization just made me produce more of what they wanted to harvest. The tech priest's mechanical voice cut through the fluid. Subject designated as Adrenal Extraction, Unit 712, Krenn. Function, Combat-Stimulant Production. Status, Operational. Estimated value to Imperium, sufficient refined stimulant to enhance 3,200 combat deployments over projected service lifetime. The Omnissiah's efficiency is absolute. 3,200 soldiers would benefit from my suffering, would inject my biochemical terror into their bloodstreams and fight with chemically induced fury. Would die with my hormones in their systems, never knowing they were using terror extracted from a man suspended in a vat, kept alive and aware solely to produce the chemicals that let them feel no fear. This was my service now. This was how the Imperium used those who couldn't fight, but could still produce something valuable. This was what happened when you were too damaged to be a soldier, but too functional to be corpse starch. The priests had told us the Emperor protects. That service is noble. That every human has purpose in his grand design. And here I was, my purpose discovered, my service rendered, my protection amounting to kept alive to be harvested. The Emperor's grand design was a processing unit, where broken soldiers were converted to biochemical ammunition. The extraction cycle began again. 47 minutes had passed. The chemicals flooded my system. The rage returned, the terror returned, and I screamed silently in my vat while they harvested what the Imperium had decided was my greatest contribution to humanity's survival. Day 1 in the vat, hour 7, extraction cycle 9. I'd counted them obsessively, clinging to numbers as the only measure of time in an environment where nothing else changed. The fluid around me was constant temperature. The light filtering through from the chamber beyond was constant intensity. The only variations were the extraction cycles. 47 minutes of baseline existence followed by biochemical hell, repeated endlessly. Each cycle followed the same pattern. Injection of stimulation compounds, immediate activation of my adrenal system, overwhelming surge of fight-or-flight hormones with nowhere to fight and no possibility of flight, extraction of the hormonal output, return to baseline. The drugs they'd given me prevented any adaptation. My body couldn't build tolerance, couldn't adjust to the stimulation. Each cycle felt as intense as the first. My system responded as if to genuine mortal danger every time. The sensation was indescribable to anyone who hadn't experienced it. Imagine the worst moment of terror you've ever felt. Maybe facing death in combat, maybe childhood nightmares, maybe existential dread in quiet moments. Now imagine that intensity artificially sustained at maximum levels for 3 to 5 minutes. Your heart pounding so hard you think it'll tear itself apart. Your muscles flooding with energy you can't use. Your consciousness filling with the absolute certainty that you need to act now, or you'll die. But you can't act, can't move, can only experience the imperative without ability to fulfill it. And the rage. The stimulation produced not just fear, but fury. A burning, caustic anger that made me want to destroy everything around me. To tear the tubes from my flesh, to smash the vat, to kill whoever had done this to me. The anger was so intense, it felt like it should ignite my blood, should burst from my body as actual flame. But it had nowhere to go. Just burned inside my skull while they harvested it through the tubes embedded in my torso. Between cycles, I had 47 minutes of comparative calm. Not peace. There was no peace. But the absence of chemically induced terror felt like relief by comparison. During these windows, I could think, could process my situation, could experience the full horror of what had been done to me and what would continue being done for years. I couldn't see much. The amber fluid distorted vision, and my head was positioned facing slightly upward, giving me a view of the vat's lid and the tubes connected to it. But I could hear. The processing chamber had constant low-level noise, machinery humming, fluid circulation systems bubbling, the occasional footsteps of medici personnel performing maintenance. Voices sometimes, discussing me as if I were equipment. Unit 712. Krenn is performing above projections. Yield is consistent at 190 to 200 milliliters per cycle. Quality analysis shows 97% purity. Excellent for battlefield deployment. Any degradation in adrenal function? Minimal. The consciousness preservation protocols are maintaining optimal stress response. As long as the subject remains aware and experiences genuine psychological distress, the glands will continue producing at this level. Good. Flag this unit as a premium producer. Extend maintenance priority to ensure maximum operational lifetime. They were pleased with me. Pleased with how terrified I was. Pleased with how effectively they could harvest that terror. My suffering had a quantifiable value, and I was exceeding expectations. In the Guard, I'd been unremarkable. Competent, but not exceptional. As an extraction unit, I was premium grade. The realization made me want to laugh, but I couldn't. The breathing apparatus prevented any vocalization. Just recycled air flowing through tubes directly to my lungs. I couldn't speak. Couldn't scream, couldn't communicate in any way except through the involuntary biochemical responses they were harvesting. My body could express terror. Nothing else mattered. I tried to remember my life before. Harvin's face, my father's voice, the simple dream of surviving to retirement. But the memories felt distant, unreal, like stories I'd heard about someone else. The extraction cycles were destroying my ability to maintain coherent thought. Each cycle flooded my brain with hormones that hijacked my consciousness, reducing me to pure survival instinct. The damage was cumulative. Between cycles, I could feel my thoughts becoming simpler, more fragmented, less capable of complex reasoning. I'd been educated. Had survived 9 years of military service requiring tactical thinking, risk assessment, independent judgment. I'd been a person who could read, write, analyze situations, make decisions. But personhood required cognitive continuity, and the extraction cycles were destroying that. Hard to maintain identity when your consciousness is regularly hijacked by chemically induced panic. Hard to think clearly when the most intense experience in your existence repeats every 47 minutes. On day 2, 24th extraction cycle, something changed. The stimulation was different, more intense. Instead of the standard terror and rage cocktail, they added something new. The sensation was worse somehow, more specifically horrible. Not just fear of death, but fear of something I couldn't name. Existential dread. The certainty not just that I would die, but that my existence had never mattered, would never matter, that consciousness itself was a cosmic mistake. Testing enhanced protocols. A decay voice said through the fluid. Unit 712. Krenn's baseline production is excellent, but we can potentially increase yield by introducing psychological horror compounds. Monitoring output. They were experimenting, finding new ways to terrify me. New combinations of chemicals that would trigger different flavors of horror, produce different hormonal profiles for harvest. I wasn't just being exploited. I was being refined, optimized, turned into the most efficient terror production system possible. The enhanced cycle ended, and the extraction systems drained my glands. Yield increased by 12%. The decay reported. Hormonal profile shows elevated cortisol, excellent for sustained combat stimulants. Subject consciousness remains intact, marking this protocol for regular rotation. They'd found a way to make it worse, and they'd use it, would rotate through different types of artificial horror to harvest different chemical profiles. My existence had become theme parks of terror, each ride designed to extract maximum biochemical value from my suffering. By day 7, 336th cycle, I'd stopped trying to track time precisely. The numbers meant nothing, just accumulating markers of continuous horror. What mattered was the cycle, baseline, stimulation, terror, extraction, baseline, repeat, forever. That was existence now. I couldn't feel most of my body anymore, not numbness, just absence of sensation. The truncated stump at my waist had no nerve endings to transmit information. My arms were paralyzed, present but non-functional, just tissue being maintained by the vat's nutrient systems. I existed primarily as torso and head, the rest purely vestigial, but I could feel everything happening inside my chest. Could feel my heart racing during extraction cycles, pounding at rates that should have caused cardiac failure. Could feel my lungs expanding and contracting, assisted by the breathing apparatus. Could feel the adrenal glands themselves. Two small organs I'd never been conscious of before, now hyper-aware of them because they were being artificially stimulated constantly. They ached. Not traditional pain, but a deep, exhausted ache like muscles worked past endurance. Glandular fatigue indicators detected, a tech priest observed during one maintenance check. Compensating with cellular regeneration stimulants, extending projected operational lifetime to 11.2 years. They could repair the damage as it occurred, keep my adrenal glands functional even as they degraded from overuse. The technology that could have healed my injuries and returned me to combat was being used instead to ensure I could continue being harvested. Efficient, horrifying, perfectly Imperial. I saw other extraction units sometimes. Not clearly, the fluid distorted everything, but shadows and shapes through the vat walls. Other bodies suspended in other vats. Other soldiers who'd been measured, found to have valuable biological functions, converted to production units. We were arranged in rows, I realized during one moment of clarity. A factory floor of human beings reduced to chemical production. Were they aware like me? Did they experience the same horror? Or had their consciousness dissolved faster, their minds breaking under the strain while their bodies continued functioning? I couldn't ask, couldn't communicate, could only float in my amber prison and wonder if the shadows around me were people or just meat that used to be people. During cycles without stimulation, I tried to hold on to humanity, tried to remember Harvin's face. Couldn't. The features had blurred into generic shapes. Tried to remember my father's advice. Keep your head down. But the irony was too bitter. I'd kept my head down, had done everything right, and I'd ended up here anyway because the Imperium didn't care about right behavior, just cared about utility. My adrenal glands were more useful than my combat skills. So here I was. I tried to pray sometimes. The conditioning was so deep that even knowing the prayers were lies, my mind would form the words, "The Emperor protects. Grant me strength. Let this end. Please." But no strength came. No end came. The Emperor, if he existed as anything more than propaganda, didn't hear prayers from the bottom of vats, or heard them and didn't care, or it never existed to begin with, just another lie in an Imperium built on lies. The priests had said suffering brought you closer to the divine, that enduring pain was purifying, that the Emperor honored those who sacrificed. But there was no honor in this. No purification, no divine proximity, just biochemical exploitation sustained by sophisticated medical technology. The only thing my suffering brought me closer to was madness. By day 14, 672nd cycle, I understood what I was becoming, not human anymore. Humans had agency, identity, capacity for complex thought. I was a biological component, a processing unit. The designation they'd given me was accurate. Adrenal Extraction Unit 712 Krenn. The name Thaddeus was increasingly irrelevant. Thaddeus had been a person. I was an organ system being maintained for harvest. The transformation wasn't physical, not entirely. Yes, my body had been dismembered, modified, integrated into machinery. But the deeper transformation was cognitive. Each extraction cycle damaged my ability to maintain continuous identity. The person I'd been was dissolving, replaced by something simpler, an awareness that experienced terror and baseline in alternating patterns, an existence reduced to biochemical rhythms, and I was aware of it happening. That was the cruelty the Medicae officer had mentioned. Consciousness preservation. They kept me aware enough to produce genuine psychological distress, which enhanced hormonal output. But that awareness meant experiencing my own dissolution, feeling my humanity eroding with each cycle, knowing I was becoming less while remaining conscious enough to understand the loss. The cycle continued. Stimulation, terror, extraction. Stimulation, terror, extraction. 47 minutes between. Years stretching ahead. My adrenal glands would produce. My consciousness would fragment. My body would be maintained, and the Imperium would benefit from my suffering, converting my biochemical horror into combat advantage for soldiers who'd never know my name. This was what it meant to serve. This was the Emperor's protection. This was the nobility of sacrifice the priests preached about. And I was beginning to understand that even hatred of my situation was becoming difficult to maintain. Hatred required coherent thought. I was losing that capacity. Soon, maybe months, maybe years, I'd be unable to even hate what had been done to me. Just experience it endlessly, awareness without comprehension, sensation without understanding. But not yet. Not quite yet. For now, I still remembered that I used to be Corporal Thaddeus Krenn, and I still had enough consciousness to understand exactly what I'd become. Month 3. Cycle 2947. The numbers were becoming meaningless, just accumulation without significance. I tried to track them anyway, clinging to quantification as the last evidence of rational thought. But the numbers themselves were degrading in my memory. Was this cycle 2947 Or had I counted wrong? Had I forgotten cycles, lost days? Time was fracturing. The intervals between extractions, those 47-minute windows, no longer felt consistent. Sometimes they seemed to stretch for hours. Sometimes they compressed to seconds. My brain's ability to measure duration was breaking down under the constant hormonal flooding. The cycles had been precise when I'd first been installed. Now they felt random, unpredictable, as if the universe itself had lost temporal structure. But the decay logs reported otherwise. When personnel performed maintenance checks, I'd hear them discussing my output. Unit 712 Krenn, day 93, all cycles nominal. Production consistency at 99.4%. Consciousness markers remained stable. The precision was theirs, not mine. To them, I was functioning perfectly. To me, existence had become a blur of terror and baseline with no clear boundaries between them. I was losing the ability to distinguish cycles from each other. Each extraction felt simultaneously like the first time. It was shocking, overwhelming, impossible to endure, and like something that had been happening forever, would always happen, could never be otherwise. My memories were deteriorating faster now. I'd tried to remember Harvin during baseline periods, but the name had stopped connecting to anything concrete. Just sounds. Harvin. What did those syllables mean? A person, someone I'd known. But the relationship, the shared experiences, the specific details, all gone. Erased by hormonal damage to the neural pathways that stored long-term memory. My father was almost completely gone. I knew intellectually I'd had a father. All humans had biological predecessors. But the specific person, Lucian Krenn, was now just a name without attached meaning. The lessons he'd taught me, the memories of his scarred body, his death on some distant world, all of it dissolved like salt in water. The extraction cycles were destroying my past, leaving only an eternal present of biochemical horror. I couldn't remember wanting anything. The concept of retirement meant nothing. I understood the word, cessation of service, but couldn't connect it to any feeling of desire or aspiration. Had I wanted something once? The question itself felt alien. I was an extraction unit. Extraction units didn't want things. They functioned. The distinction between human and extraction unit was collapsing in my consciousness. I'd spent the first weeks fighting to maintain identity, to remember I was Thaddeus, a person with history and selfhood. But the effort was becoming impossible. The cycles destroyed any attempt at narrative coherence. Hard to maintain a sense of self when your consciousness is regularly hijacked by biochemical imperatives. Hard to think I'm a person when your primary experience is I am terror. The tech priests had understood this. That's why consciousness preservation was their goal rather than consciousness maintenance. They didn't need me to remain a person, just needed me aware enough to produce genuine psychological responses. And psychological responses didn't require personhood, just required an experiencing subject. Something that could feel fear without necessarily understanding it, that could generate hormones without needing to comprehend why. I was simplifying, becoming something that existed in the present moment exclusively, without past or future, without narrative or identity. Just immediate experience, baseline or stimulation, calm or terror, existence or extraction. Binary states cycling endlessly. Sometimes I'd have moments of clarity, brief windows where my thoughts would sharpen and I'd remember that I used to be more than this. used to be capable of complex reasoning, emotional depth, self-reflection. During these moments, the horror would intensify beyond bearing. I'd understand completely what had been done to me, what I'd lost, what I'd become. The anguish was so profound it felt like it should stop my heart. But then the next cycle would begin. The stimulation chemicals would flood my system. The terror would override everything else. And when that cycle ended, the clarity would be gone, washed away by the hormonal surge, leaving only simplified awareness. The Medici celebrated these clarity moments. Subject is demonstrating periodic enhanced consciousness episodes, one reported during month 4. These correlate with significantly elevated output. Subject produces 16% more during cycles immediately following awareness spikes. Hypothesis: existential dread produces superior biochemical profiles compared to simple fear. Recommendation: induce awareness episodes twice per week to maximize harvest quality. They were going to force clarity on me. Make me understand my situation more fully, because understanding made the terror more profound, and the terror more profound made the harvest more valuable. My anguish had quantifiable worth. They'd optimize it like they optimized everything else. The forced clarity sessions began in month 5. Different chemicals, different stimulation protocols. Instead of triggering basic fear responses, they'd restore my cognitive capacity temporarily, return my ability to think complexly, remember clearly, understand fully, return my personhood just long enough to experience what it meant to lose it. During these sessions, I'd remember everything. Thaddeus Krenn, corporal, 9 years service, friend of Harvin, son of Lucian. All the context that made me a person rather than a thing. And then they'd trigger the extraction, and I'd experience terror not as simple hormonal response, but as conscious existential understanding. Knowing I was trapped, knowing I'd be trapped for years, knowing my consciousness was being preserved solely to be exploited. Knowing that even this moment of clarity was part of the exploitation designed to enhance their harvest. The horror during forced clarity was transcendent, beyond anything I'd experienced in combat, beyond anything I'd thought possible for a human mind to contain. And my adrenal glands would respond proportionally, flooding my system with chemicals so pure and concentrated that the Medici would actually cheer. Exceptional yield: 290 milliliters of premium-grade stimulant from a single forced clarity cycle. This batch will enhance an entire platoon's combat effectiveness. Unit 712. Krenn has officially exceeded projections by 43%. Recommend this protocol become standard for all premium-tier extraction units. I was a success story, a model extraction unit. They'd write protocols based on my suffering. Other soldiers would be processed using methods refined on my consciousness. My contribution to Imperial efficiency was significant. I should have been proud. But pride required selfhood, and selfhood was something I only experienced during forced clarity. And those experiences were so horrible that pride couldn't coexist with them, just existed in parallel. Awareness that I was valuable equipment. Awareness that I was a person being destroyed, unable to reconcile the two perspectives because reconciliation required cognitive capacity I no longer possessed. By month 7, I'd stopped trying to maintain human thought patterns during baseline periods. Too exhausting, too pointless. Better to exist simply. Aware but not thinking. Present but not planning. experiencing but not interpreting. Let consciousness reduce to its minimal viable state, just barely enough to produce the hormonal responses they required. Nothing more. I could still feel everything happening in my body, could feel my heart's rhythm, never normal anymore, always elevated from the constant stimulation, always straining. Could feel my lungs working, assisted by the breathing apparatus. Could feel the adrenal glands, exhausted and inflamed, producing without rest. Could feel the extraction tubes drawing fluids from my tissues every cycle. The sensations were becoming my entire existence. Not thoughts about sensations, just raw experience, heartbeat, breathing, glandular ache, fluid temperature, tube pressure, baseline or terror, calm or rage, binary states without interpretation. The world beyond the vat was irrelevant. Sometimes I'd hear voices discussing the war I'd been fighting when I got injured. The Kiraz IV campaign was over. The Imperium had won, apparently. Or lost, or declared victory and withdrawn. The details didn't matter. Soldiers had died. Cities had been destroyed. Resources had been allocated, and I'd contributed, not through combat, but through the stimulants refined from my suffering and distributed to the troops. How many soldiers had injected my terror into their veins? How many had fought with chemically induced fearlessness derived from my glands? Dozens, hundreds. Had any of them survived? Would they remember the injection that helped them survive, or was it just routine pre-combat protocol to them? Did they know what they were using? The questions felt distant, not mine anymore. Just logical curiosities without emotional attachment. I couldn't care about those soldiers. Caring required empathy, and empathy required recognizing others as similar to yourself. But I wasn't similar to anyone anymore. I was unique, singular, an extraction unit experiencing existence no other consciousness had experienced, unless the other vats held similar awareness. The shadows around me. Were they having thoughts like these? Were they further along in the degradation process, already reduced to pure sensation without even the fragment of cognition I maintained? Or were they recent additions, still thinking like soldiers, still remembering names and faces, still believing they might somehow escape or die? I couldn't ask, couldn't reach them. Each of us was isolated in our amber prisons, connected only by the shared purpose of production. We were a factory, biological machinery arranged for maximum efficiency. Individual experience was irrelevant. Only collective output mattered. The tech priests understood this. When they performed maintenance on my vat, they'd discuss processing efficiency for the entire facility. Chamber 12 operates at 94.7% nominal capacity. Units 712 Krenn, 712 Marlid, and 712 Kozen are premium producers. Units 712 Velk and 712 Torvin show declining output, recommend enhanced stimulation protocols or replacement. Replacement meant death. If your production declined too much, they'd terminate you and install a new soldier in your vat. Efficient, economical, perfectly imperial. Your years of service meant nothing if the current output metrics were insufficient. I was producing well, exceeding projections. They'd maintain me for years because I was valuable. My reward for superior performance was extended suffering. In the Guard, superior performance might earn you promotion, better assignments, recognition. As an extraction unit, superior performance earned you longer operational lifetime. More years in the vat, more cycles of terror, more consciousness preserved to experience its own exploitation. Better to be Velk or Torvin, failing in their function, approaching the mercy of termination. But my adrenal glands were too healthy, my consciousness too resilient, my body too functional. I'd survive for years, for a decade maybe, producing premium-grade terror until my biological systems finally failed from exhaustion, and they'd squeeze every last milliliter of horror from my glands before they allowed me to die. This was eternity, not theological eternity. I'd be dead eventually. But experiential eternity, when every moment felt infinite, when time had no structure, when past and future collapsed into perpetual present, then 12 years might as well be 12,000. Infinity measured not in duration, but in the quality of experience, and my experience was infinitely horrible. The cycle continued. Stimulation, terror, extraction, forced clarity twice per week, maintenance protocols, output reports, efficiency metrics, my life as numbers on Medicaid logs, my consciousness as production resource, my suffering as imperial contribution. Month 12. Probably. Maybe month 13. The distinction didn't matter anymore. Just cycles. Just existence. Just terror and baseline and forced clarity and degradation. I used to be Thaddeus Krenn. I used to be a person. I used to want things, remember things, think things. Now I was Adrenal Extraction Unit 712 Krenn. I produced combat stimulants. I exceeded projections. I functioned optimally. And somewhere in the minimal consciousness they'd preserved, I still knew the difference between these two statements. Still understood what I'd lost. Still experienced the horror of that understanding. For now. Year 2. Cycle 18,412. Or maybe not. Numbers had stopped being reliable. I counted when I could, lost track during periods of confusion, resumed counting with arbitrary starting points. Their precision was illusion, just the appearance of measurement without actual meaning. Time had become purely subjective, measured only in extraction cycles, not in days or hours. The baseline periods between extractions, still 47 minutes according to Medicaid protocols, probably felt sometimes brief, sometimes eternal, depending on factors I couldn't identify. My consciousness no longer tracked duration consistently. Just experienced. Now terror, now baseline, now terror, now baseline, without clear boundaries between states. I'd lost most language. Not immediately. The deterioration had been gradual, words dropping from my vocabulary one by one as the neural pathways sustaining them degraded from hormonal damage. Now only fragments remained. Pain, terror, cycle, extract. Basic concepts, complex ideas were gone. I couldn't have articulated, the Imperium is exploiting my biological functions anymore. Could only feel bad, hurt, fear, always. The forced clarity sessions were worse now because they'd restore language temporarily, and with it the ability to understand my situation in precise terms. Suddenly, I'd have words again, full sentences, complex grammar, abstract concepts, and I'd use them to comprehend exactly what had happened to me. Then the stimulation would begin, and I'd experience terror with full linguistic cognition. I am trapped. This will never end. I am being harvested. My consciousness is maintained solely for exploitation. Help me. Someone help me. Please. But there was never help. just extraction, then return to simplified awareness where language dissolved again, leaving only sensation. I'd forgotten almost everyone from my previous life. Harvin was completely gone. The name meant nothing, couldn't connect to any memory or emotion. My father was an abstract concept. I had a progenitor, without any specific content. My 9 years of guard service were reduced to vague sense memories, cold, exhaustion, fear, but without context or narrative. The only memory that persisted was the moment of selection. The decay officer saying, "Your adrenal function makes you ideally suited for biochemical extraction." That moment remained crystal clear, replaying during forced clarity sessions with perfect detail. The inflection of his voice, the clinical detachment, the moment I'd realized what was about to happen. That memory was branded into my consciousness, permanent, impossible to erase. Maybe because it was the moment Thaddeus Krenn died, the moment the person ended and the extraction unit began, the precise boundary between what I was and what I'd become. That moment mattered in ways nothing else did, so it persisted while everything else degraded. My body was failing in small ways that the Medici would repair immediately. Heart damage from constant elevated rhythms, fixed with cellular regeneration treatments. Lung degradation from extended immersion, addressed with respiratory augmentation. Adrenal gland fatigue, compensated with artificial stimulation to force continued production. Every system monitored, every failure corrected, every component maintained for maximum operational lifetime. They'd removed my arms in year 1, month 9. Unnecessary tissue-consuming nutrients that could be better allocated to glandular function. I didn't resist, couldn't have resisted, didn't mourn the loss particularly. The arms had been paralyzed, non-functional, just vestigial limbs that used to be mine. Their absence simplified me further. Head and torso, organs and consciousness, nothing else. I'd tried to die multiple times. Not through action, I couldn't act, through will, trying to stop my heart by intention alone, trying to cease breathing despite the apparatus, trying to simply refuse to continue existing. But biology didn't work that way. Consciousness couldn't terminate life through desire alone. The body continued functioning, the Medici continued maintaining, and I continued experiencing regardless of preference. During one forced clarity session, I'd understood with perfect lucidity. I would never die through choice. Death would come only when my adrenal glands finally failed beyond repair, when cellular regeneration could no longer compensate for the damage, when my biological systems exhausted themselves completely. Until that moment, years away, maybe decades, I would persist in this state, aware, suffering, harvested. The understanding was so horrible that my adrenal output during that cycle set facility records. 317 milliliters of maximum purity stimulant, the Medici had celebrated. Unit 712. Krenn continues exceeding all projections. This consciousness preservation protocol is the most successful implementation in Imperial processing history. My suffering was historic, record-breaking, an achievement to be proud of, if pride were something I could still feel outside forced clarity sessions. The other extraction units were changing around me. I could hear them sometimes, not words, just sounds, breathing through apparatus, fluid circulation, occasional mechanical noises from vat maintenance. We were connected by sound, by shared purpose, by parallel suffering, but we couldn't communicate. each isolated in private horror. Some units were terminated. I'd hear the medici discussing declining production efficiency and replacement protocols. Then the sounds from that vat would stop. Silence where there had been breathing. A new soldier would be installed hours or days later, and the sounds would resume. The cycle of processing continued. Soldiers injured, measured, selected, installed, harvested, expended, replaced. I'd outlasted 3 generations of surrounding units. 712 Marlid had failed in month 17. 712 Kosan in year 1, month 22. Both replaced with new designations whose names I never learned. I was senior equipment now, the longest functioning extraction unit in Chamber 12. Premium producer, model system. My reward was consciousness. Lesser units had their awareness degrade faster. The Medicae would mention it during maintenance checks. 712. Krenn maintains consciousness markers significantly above baseline. Psychological resilience is exceptional. This specimen's cognitive architecture resists degradation better than 94% of processed subjects. I was too functional to dissolve into merciful oblivion. Too resilient to break completely, too healthy to fail. My punishment for biological excellence was extended awareness of biological exploitation. The war had changed outside my vat. I'd hear fragments during medici conversations, new campaigns, different fronts, changing strategies. The Kiraz IV conflict that had injured me was ancient history. Years had passed. The galaxy ground on. Soldiers fought and died. The Imperium consumed resources and populations and worlds, and I remained in my amber fluid, producing terror juice for warriors, fighting conflicts I'd never understand. How much stimulant had I produced? The numbers were staggering when Medicae would discuss them. Unit 712. Krenn lifetime production, 473 liters of refined combat-stimulant, sufficient for 31,800 individual combat doses. 31,000 doses. 31,000 injections. 31,000 soldiers enhanced by my biochemical horror. If even a fraction had survived the battles they'd been dosed for, I'd saved thousands of lives. If you measured contribution in saved lives, I was more valuable than I'd ever been as a combat soldier. But saving lives required intentionality, required choice, required a person deciding to act for others' benefit. I wasn't saving anyone, I was being harvested, and the harvest happened to be useful for others. No different than a mineral vein being mined, the resources valuable but the vein itself unconscious of contribution. Except I was conscious. That was the distinction, the horror, the cruelty. Mineral veins didn't experience their exploitation. I did. Every moment, every cycle, for years. The forced clarity sessions had reached twice-weekly frequency. Every third day, they'd restore my cognitive capacity fully, return me to human-level consciousness, give me back language and memory and abstract thought, and then immediately trigger an extraction cycle. The terror I'd experienced during those sessions wasn't simple fear. It was conscious, articulated understanding of my eternal suffering, compressed into the most intense possible psychological experience. I am Thaddeus Krenn, I'd think with crystal clarity. I was a soldier. I was injured. They measured my adrenal function and decided I was more valuable as biological equipment than as a person. They dismembered me, installed me in this vat, and have been harvesting my terror for 2 years. I will remain here for 8 to 10 more years, experiencing this continuously until my body fails. There is no escape, no rescue, no hope. This is the rest of my life. The hormonal response to that understanding was exquisite. 300 plus milliliters of maximum grade stimulant every forced clarity cycle. The decay would harvest it, refine it, package it with designations like Frenzy Chem Grade Alpha or Fury Serum Premium, and distribute it to the front lines where soldiers would inject my existential despair and fight with chemically induced fearlessness. They were injecting my understanding that I'd never escape, my knowledge that I'd suffer for another decade, my conscious awareness of exploitation, and they'd fight better because of it, feeling no fear themselves, because they'd borrowed my terror, metabolized it, converted it to aggression and combat effectiveness. I was saving lives by experiencing what they didn't have to experience. My suffering was their anesthetic. My horror was their courage, and the Imperium called this efficient, called this optimal resource allocation, called this service. By year 3, I'd stopped counting cycles entirely. Couldn't maintain the focus required. Numbers meant nothing anyway. Just lived in eternal present, this moment of terror, this moment of baseline, this moment of forced clarity, this moment of pain. No progression, no development, no change except gradual degradation that Medici immediately corrected. The concept of future had become meaningless. Future implied change, implied something different from now, but nothing would change. This was permanent. This was my existence until biological failure. Calling it future implied it was something other than extended present. Just this, forever, until organic systems failed. I couldn't remember wanting anything different. Couldn't conceive of alternative existence. This was reality. Amber fluid, breathing apparatus, extraction tubes, cycles of terror and baseline and forced clarity. This had always been reality. This would always be reality, the notion that I'd once been something else. A soldier, a person, someone with a different life, felt like false memory implanted by the forced clarity chemicals. Maybe I'd never been Thaddeus Krenn. Maybe I'd always been Extraction Unit 712 Krenn. Maybe the memories they gave me during clarity sessions were fabricated, designed to enhance psychological distress by making me believe I'd lost something I never actually had. How would I know the difference? How could I verify past existence when my consciousness was regularly hijacked and modified by chemicals? The question was too complex to maintain. Required cognitive capacity I only possessed during forced clarity. During baseline, I just existed, aware but not thinking, present but not reflecting. A consciousness reduced to minimum viable function, sufficient to produce hormonal responses, insufficient for anything else. The Medici called it success, premium function, optimal production, model unit. I called it nothing, couldn't call it anything. Just experienced it endlessly in the eternal present that had consumed everything else. The cycle continued. Year 5. Probably. The number came from overhearing Medici reports, not from my own tracking. I'd completely lost the ability to count cycles. Couldn't maintain focus long enough. Couldn't remember what number I'd reached between one cycle and the next. Time existed only as immediate experience, not as cumulative measurement. I'd become something that had never existed before. Not human. Humanity required qualities I no longer possessed. Not servitor. Servitors were lobotomized, their consciousness eliminated. Not machine. Machines lacked awareness entirely. I was a hybrid state, consciousness without agency, awareness without cognition, experience without understanding. The Medicaes had terminology for it. During one maintenance check, a visiting tech priest from another facility had examined me and noted, "Fascinating specimen. Consciousness maintained at threshold state, aware enough to generate authentic psychological distress, simplified enough to prevent adaptation or desensitization. The ultimate extraction unit, perpetual terror production without the inefficiency of complete personality." Perpetual terror production. That was my function, my purpose, my entire existence. I had been successfully refined to singular focus, produce hormones, experience fear, generate extractable biochemistry. Everything else eliminated as waste. I couldn't remember my name anymore. Not during baseline states. During forced clarity, they'd restore the knowledge. "You are Thaddeus Krenn." And I'd understand briefly that those sounds designated my identity. But between forced clarity sessions, the name was gone. Just knew I was 712 Krenn, extraction unit, premium producer. Language was almost completely lost. Even basic words had degraded. Could no longer think pain, just felt sensation without word attached. Could no longer think fear, just experience the state. Could no longer think help. The concept itself was gone, erased by years of understanding that no help would come. The forced clarity sessions were the only times I thought in words. And those words were screaming, "No, no, no, not again, please stop, please let me die, please, I can't, I can't, I can't." But the screaming was internal, couldn't vocalize, couldn't act on the desperation, just experienced it with full linguistic capacity while they harvested the hormonal output of that experience. My body was more machinery than flesh now. The Medicae had made continuous modifications, replacing failing organic systems with mechanical augmentation. My heart was partially artificial, augmented with pump mechanisms to maintain circulation despite constant stress. My lungs were reinforced with synthetic tissue to prevent collapse. My adrenal glands, the valuable components, were wrapped in preservative technologies that would keep them functioning years beyond natural limitation. I was being kept alive well past the point my organic systems would have failed. The 7 to 12-year operational lifetime they'd projected was being extended through technological intervention. They'd mentioned 15 years as possible during a recent assessment. 15 years. I'd been here 5, 10 more years of this, a decade, an eternity. During forced clarity, when I could do mathematics, the numbers were crushing. If I continued producing at current rates for 10 more years, I'd generate over 800 liters of combat-stimulant, sufficient for 50,000 individual combat doses, 50,000 soldiers enhanced. Thousands of lives potentially saved because I existed in continuous suffering. Was it worth it? The question came during clarity sessions. 50,000 doses versus one consciousness trapped in eternal horror. The utilitarian calculation was obvious. Many benefit, one suffers. The mathematics favor the many. The Imperium had made the rational choice. My suffering was justified by the benefit to others. Except I couldn't agree to the calculus. Couldn't choose to sacrifice myself for the many because choice had been removed. Utilitarian mathematics requires voluntary participation to be ethical. Forced sacrifice is just exploitation, regardless of how many benefit. But ethics required the capacity for moral reasoning, and I only possessed that capacity during forced clarity sessions, which existed precisely to make me suffer more intensely, thus invalidating any ethical consideration. The system was perfect in its horror. Restored my ability to think philosophically just long enough to understand why my suffering was philosophically unjustifiable, then harvested the distress that understanding produced. The other extraction units were less functional than me. I could hear the difference during maintenance. Their breathing was labored, irregular. Their VAT systems required more frequent adjustment. The medici discussed declining efficiency. I was the premium unit in Chamber 12. The gold standard. The one they'd use as model for refining future processing protocols. My superior suffering would make future suffering more efficient. The methods they'd developed on my consciousness would be applied to other soldiers, producing more terror per capita, more stimulant per unit, more combat effectiveness per ounce of human agony. I was contributing to Imperial efficiency in ways beyond just my own production. I was helping them perfect the system. During one forced clarity session, the horror of that realization produced the highest output I'd ever generated. 391 milliliters of pure-grade stimulant. The medici actually applauded. Magnificent! The philosophical horror protocols are exceeding even optimistic projections. Unit 712. Krenn is not just a producer, but a research breakthrough. These methods will transform Imperial biochemical warfare efficiency. My suffering was revolutionary. My despair was scientific advancement. My existence was contributing to the Imperium's military capabilities in measurable, quantifiable, celebrated ways. I should have felt proud. But pride required self-conception, and I only possessed self-conception during forced clarity. And during those times, I felt only horror. Couldn't reconcile I am contributing valuably with I am being destroyed continuously. The contradiction existed in parallel, unresolved, irresolvable. I'd lost all memory of sensory experience outside the vat. Couldn't remember what dry air felt like. Couldn't remember the sensation of walking. Couldn't remember sunlight or wind or any tactile experience except amber fluid against nerve endings that barely transmitted sensation anymore. The vat was the only reality I could access. Everything else was abstract information provided during forced clarity, but without experiential correlation. Had I ever been outside this vat? Intellectually, during clarity, I'd be told yes. I'd been a soldier, lived in barracks, fought on worlds. But experientially, I couldn't confirm it. This fluid, these tubes, this extraction cycle, this was all I'd ever known from the perspective of continuous experience. The past they described during clarity felt like fiction. Plausible fiction, but fiction nonetheless. Maybe I'd been grown in this vat, a biological system engineered from inception for extraction purposes. The Thaddeus Krenn identity, just a control mechanism. False memories designed to enhance suffering by creating illusion of loss. How would I verify otherwise? My memory only extended through continuous experience, and continuous experience began and ended in amber fluid. The question was too complex, couldn't maintain it. It dissolved, leaving only this moment, this sensation, this existence. My consciousness had become singular, unified with my function. I didn't serve as an extraction unit. I was an extraction unit. The distinction between identity and purpose had collapsed. I was what I did, and what I did was produce terror biochemically. That was selfhood now. That was existence. The Medici had achieved their goal. Consciousness preserved but simplified, awareness maintained but refined, horror sustained indefinitely without adaptation. I was optimal equipment, premium function, maximum efficiency. And somewhere in the preserved consciousness, some fragment that still knew it had been Thaddeus Krenn, that still remembered being human, that still understood what had been lost, that fragment experienced the horror continuously. Not as thought, just as sensation, just as knowing without words that this wasn't right, wasn't natural, wasn't how existence was supposed to be. But that fragment was shrinking, degrading further with each cycle. Eventually, months, years, it would vanish entirely, and I'd be pure extraction unit. Consciousness without content, awareness without object, experience without experiencer, just biological systems producing chemicals while something that used to be awareness flickered in the meat. Not yet, not quite yet. For now, the fragment persisted. The knowing remained. The horror continued, and the extraction cycle repeated, and repeated, and repeated. Forever, or until organic failure, which, with Medici intervention, might also be forever. My name is Corporal Thaddeus Krenn, and I am screaming. I've been screaming for 2,473 days. No, that number is wrong. That was year 2. I'm in year 7 now, or year 8, or year 12. The numbers don't work anymore. Just know it's been long, very long, longer than humans are supposed to remain conscious in one state, longer than suffering is supposed to be sustainable. I'm screaming inside my skull because they removed my vocal cords, removed my arms, removed everything except what they needed to keep me producing. Head and torso in amber fluid. Tubes penetrating at 17 points. No, more now. They've added extraction points. 23 tubes, maybe. Hard to count, hard to focus. The cycle is eternal. Baseline, stimulation, terror, extraction. Baseline, stimulation, terror, extraction. 47 minutes between cycles, they say. Feels like seconds sometimes, hours other times, centuries other times. Time doesn't work right when you're not human anymore. When your equipment that used to be human, when your consciousness trapped in flesh that serves a function you can't escape. I remember being Thaddeus. Sometimes. During forced clarity sessions, they give me back my name, my memories, my ability to understand, give me back personhood just long enough to experience what it means to lose it. Then they harvest the anguish. 300 to 400 milliliters of premium-grade terror. Bottle it, ship it, inject it into soldiers who'll fight without fear because I'm experiencing the fear for them. How many doses now? 50,000, 100,000. How many soldiers have metabolized my suffering? How many lived because I died without dying? The numbers should mean something, should feel significant. But they're just data, accumulation without meaning, just like the cycles, just like time, just like existence. My adrenal glands are exhausted. I can feel them. Constant ache, deep in my core, organs worked past any reasonable limit. But the Medici keep them functional, wrap them in technology, force them to regenerate. Stimulate them chemically to produce beyond capacity. Can't let valuable equipment fail. Can't waste the investment. I've been producing for 7 years, maybe 10, maybe 3. Time is broken. Doesn't matter. The point is, I've exceeded all projections. I'm the success story, the premium unit, the one they show to visiting officials as example of processing efficiency. Unit 712. Krenn has generated unprecedented volume of combat-stimulant while maintaining consciousness markers well above baseline. This represents the apex of Imperial biological resource utilization. My suffering is exemplary. My horror is optimized. My existence is efficient, and I want to die. Want is too strong. I don't want anything during baseline states. Wanting requires cognitive capacity I don't possess except during forced clarity, but there's something deeper than wanting. Something cellular. Every biological system in my body is trying to fail, trying to shut down, trying to terminate, and the Medici won't let it. Keep intervening, keep repairing, keep forcing me to continue. I'm too valuable to die, too functional to fail, too productive to terminate. The reward for superior performance is extended service. The consequence of excellence is prolonged suffering. The Imperium doesn't waste resources, and I'm a premium resource, so I'll be maintained until absolutely nothing remains. Until the last possible moment, the final extractable chemical, the ultimate drop of harvestable terror. Other units have failed around me. All the original extractions from Chamber 12 are gone. 712 Marlid, 712 Kosen, all the others, terminated when production declined, replaced with new soldiers, new bodies, new consciousness to harvest. I'm the only original remaining. The veteran, the senior extraction unit, the one who survived longest through sheer biological resilience. My reward is consciousness, while others achieve the mercy of death. Sometimes I hear the new units when they're first installed. They scream, actual screaming, vocal, desperate. Takes weeks before the Medici remove their vocal cords. During those weeks, I hear them, begging, pleading, demanding to know why this is happening, promising they'll serve however needed if only they can remain human. Praying to the Emperor for protection, the prayers especially. I remember prayers from forced clarity. Remember the words, the Emperor protects. Grant me strength, deliver me from suffering. Empty words. Conditioning. Lies told to make us compliant. The Emperor doesn't protect. Never has. Just corpse on throne while Imperium grinds humans into components and calls it service. I used to pray. During my first months, mouthing the words even without vocal cords, forming the syllables in my mind. Please, Emperor, let this end. I've served faithfully. I don't deserve this. Please. But no end came, no divine intervention, no mercy from the machinery of the Imperium, just continued cycles, continued extraction, continued suffering. The Emperor protects nothing, the Imperium protects nothing. They just process resources efficiently, and I'm a resource, so I'm processed. That's all. No divine plan. No greater purpose. Just biological equipment being utilized until depletion. I've lost nearly everything that made me Thaddeus Krenn. The memories are gone, the relationships are gone, the dreams are gone, the language is gone except during forced clarity. The identity is gone except as designation. 712 Krenn, extraction unit, premium grade. But something remains. Some fragment of consciousness that knows this isn't right, doesn't have words for it, doesn't have thoughts about it. Just knows, wrong, hurt, trapped, bad. Basic awareness below language. Below thought, below everything except pure experience. That fragment is me, the last piece of Thaddeus. And it's aware, always aware. Can't escape through unconsciousness, can't dissolve into complete oblivion. Just experiences eternally this cycle, this moment, this suffering, this existence. And that fragment understands, without words, without thoughts, just understands that this will continue for years, maybe decades, until organic systems fail completely, until the medici finally exhaust their ability to repair, until I've produced every possible milliliter of terror my glands can generate. This is eternity, not theological eternity. That would require death first. Experiential eternity, when present moment stretches infinite, when past and future collapse into singular now, when existence becomes pure unchanging suffering. That's eternity. And I'm in it, have been for years, will be for more years, am in it now, will always be in it. The cycle begins again, stimulation chemicals flooding my system, terror rising, hormones cascading, extraction tubes activating. My consciousness hijacked by artificial fear, my body producing what they need, my existence serving its function. I'm Corporal Thaddeus Krenn. I'm Adrenal Extraction Unit 712 Krenn. I'm screaming, I will always be screaming. Year 11. The number comes from Medici records, not my awareness. I heard them discussing milestone. Unit 712. Krenn has achieved operational duration of 11.3 years, exceeding initial projections by 93%. Total lifetime production, 947 liters of Combat-Stimulant, equivalent to 63,100 combat doses. This unit has enhanced approximately 8,000 individual soldiers' combat effectiveness, contributing to estimated 3,000 Imperial victories across 47 active combat zones. 3,000 victories, 8,000 soldiers, 63,000 doses, all from my suffering, all extracted from consciousness trapped in amber fluid. All because my adrenal glands were measured, found valuable, and harvested for over a decade. The war I'd been fighting when injured, Kiraz IV, was ancient history now. That conflict ended 9 years ago. Most of the soldiers I'd served with were dead. The officers who'd commanded me were retired, or killed, or promoted to other duties. The world itself had been rebuilt, renamed, repopulated. No one remembered the battle that had crushed my legs and ended my life as a person. But I remained, still producing, still functional, still aware. New wars consumed the Imperium's attention. New campaigns required chemical enhancement. New soldiers needed fury serum and frenzy chem to fight effectively. And my glands supplied them year after year, cycle after cycle, producing terror juice for warriors who'd never know my name. I'd become institutional, a permanent fixture of Processing Unit 7. The unit other extraction subjects were compared against. Your performance must match 712 Krenn standards. Medicae would tell newly processed soldiers. My suffering was the baseline. My horror was the minimum acceptable production level. I'd set the standard for Imperial biological exploitation. The facility had expanded around me. Chamber 12 was no longer isolated. They'd built additional processing chambers, installed hundreds of new extraction units. The Medicae would discuss facility statistics. Current operational capacity, 470 extraction units, producing combined annual output of 32,000 liters of refined combat stimulants. This facility alone supplies 17% of total Imperial biochemical warfare requirements for the segmentum obscurus. I was one of 470, no longer unique, just senior equipment among masses of harvested soldiers. The protocols they developed on my consciousness were now standard procedure. The forced clarity sessions I'd pioneered were mandatory for all premium-grade units. The suffering that had been mine alone was now shared by hundreds. Should I feel solidarity, unity with fellow extraction units? We were experiencing parallel horror, trapped in adjacent vats, harvested by the same systems. But I couldn't feel solidarity. Couldn't feel much of anything except during forced clarity. Just existed, just experienced cycles, just produced. During forced clarity sessions, they'd sometimes give me information. Current Imperial status: 17 active crusades, 247 combat zones, estimated 400 billion active military personnel. Combat-Stimulant usage has increased 300% over past decade due to enhanced tactical doctrines emphasizing aggressive engagement. Demand for biochemical warfare resources exceeds production capacity. Facilities like this one are critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure. I was plumbing, electrical systems, foundation, the unglamorous but essential components that kept the Imperium functioning. Not a soldier anymore, not a person, just infrastructure. Maintained, utilized, replaced when failing. Valuable but not valued. Necessary but not acknowledged. The new extraction units would arrive weekly. I could hear them being installed. The Medicai's clinical instructions, the servitor's mechanical precision, the subject's screaming. They'd scream for days, sometimes weeks, always the same progression. Denial, bargaining, begging, despair, acceptance, silence. Some would reach silence faster. Those were the weak ones, the Medici said. Consciousness failing early, others would take months. A few would take years. I'd taken years, 11 years, and counting. My consciousness was too resilient, too stubborn, too incompatible with mercy. I couldn't break completely. Couldn't achieve the oblivion of total cognitive collapse. Just simplified to minimum viable awareness and stuck there. Producing, experiencing, continuing. Sometimes I'd wonder if the other units were aware like me, if they could hear me like I heard them, if they experienced forced clarity the way I did, if they understood what we were. But I couldn't ask, couldn't communicate. Each of us isolated in our private nightmare, connected only by shared purpose and proximity. Were we still human? The question came during forced clarity. We had human DNA, human origin, human consciousness, degraded but present. But humanity was more than biology. It was agency, communication, participation in social structures. We had none of that. Just biological systems producing chemicals, while something that used to be awareness experienced isolation. Maybe we were post-human. A new category. Consciousness without personhood. Awareness without humanity. Experience without experiencer. Something that had never existed before Imperial processing technology created us. A novel form of existence born from efficiency and necessity. The tech priests would agree. During maintenance, they'd discuss theoretical frameworks. These units represent successful integration of biological and mechanical systems at consciousness level. Not servitors. Servitors are lobotomized. Not humans. Humans possess agency. A third state. biological resource with preserved awareness for optimal production. The Omnissiah's wisdom manifests in novel forms. Novel forms. That was us. Innovation in suffering. Advancement in exploitation. Progress measured in how efficiently consciousness could be harvested. I was part of Imperial advancement, contributing to humanity's survival against Xenos threats, heretical uprising, demon incursion. My suffering had military value, strategic importance, historical significance. Historians might someday note the development of enhanced combat stimulant production in early M41 provided critical advantages during whatever wars this was, enabling Imperial forces to maintain operational effectiveness despite overwhelming casualties. And a footnote might mention, production required biological extraction from living subjects who are maintained in conscious states to optimize hormonal output. Just a footnote, technical detail, easily glossed over, but I was living that footnote. I was the technical detail. I was the process historians would reduce to single sentence, and I'd experience every moment of it with a fragment of consciousness they'd preserved for precisely that purpose. By year 12, overheard from Medici reports, my production had begun declining. Not dramatically, just 1 or 2%, but measurable. Unit 712. Krenn demonstrates early markers of glandular fatigue. Cellular regeneration protocols are compensating, but eventual failure is inevitable. Current projection, 2 to 4 additional years of viable function before termination becomes necessary. 2 to 4 years. After 12 years, I had maybe 4 more, maybe only 2. Finally, an end. Not a distant theoretical end, but approximate one. Years, not decades. Consciousness could survive years. I'd already survived 12. 4 more was possible. Terrible, but possible. During the next forced clarity session, that information crystallized into conscious understanding. I will die in 2 to 4 years. My adrenal glands will fail. The decay will terminate me. This horror has a conclusion. It's not infinite, just feels infinite. There's an actual end. The understanding produced complex emotions. Relief, finally, eventual cessation of suffering. Despair, 2 to 4 years was still eternity measured in cycles. Hope, death was coming. Horror, death was still years away. The contradictions existed simultaneously, unresolved, producing chemical chaos in my system that the extraction tubes harvested efficiently. Excellent output, the Medici noted. Existential complexity produces superior biochemical profiles. Unit 712. Krenn continues demonstrating why consciousness preservation is critical for premium production. My awareness that I'd die soon was valuable. My hope for death enhanced their harvest. Even my eventual termination would serve Imperial interests. My final extractions would be especially potent, the Medici explained, as failing biological systems produced desperate hormonal surges. They'd harvest me literally to death, collecting final outputs as my consciousness dissolved and my glands gave out. Efficient, optimal, perfectly Imperial. The cycle continued. Stimulation, terror, extraction, baseline, forced clarity, production, 2 to 4 more years, maybe 8,000 more cycles, maybe 16,000. Numbers that should feel finite, but felt infinite anyway, because each cycle felt like eternity, and eternity multiplied remained eternity. But there would be an end. That was new information. Changed nothing about the present moment. Still trapped, still harvested, still suffering. But somewhere ahead, measured in years, was cessation, termination. Whatever came after consciousness, oblivion probably, maybe something worse, but definitely something different from this. I could survive 2 to 4 years, had already survived 12, could survive 4 more, had to survive 4 more. No choice about surviving, would continue until biological failure regardless of preference. The cycle continued. The year stretched ahead. The end approached, slowly, one extraction cycle at a time. Year 13. Month 7. Day unknown. Cycle impossible to count. I'm approaching the end. The Medici discuss it openly now. Unit 712. Krenn exhibits terminal glandular fatigue. Cellular regeneration has reached compensatory limits. Estimated remaining function 4 to 8 months maximum. Prepare replacement unit. 4 to 8 months. Weeks. Cycles. The end is measurable now. Countable. Actually approaching. During forced clarity sessions, I can think about what this means. Can process the philosophy of 13 years spent as biological equipment. Can understand what the Imperium did to me and why and what it represents about humanity's future in the galaxy. This is what service means. Not glory, not honor, not nobility. Service means usefulness. And when intact service isn't possible, the Imperium finds other uses. Broken soldiers become extraction units. Damaged humans become biological resources. Consciousness becomes harvesting target. Nothing is wasted. Everything serves. The priests preach that the Emperor protects, that faith is rewarded, that sacrifice is glorious. But I am the truth behind those lies. I am what happens when protection fails, when faith is conditioning, when sacrifice is compulsory. I am the logical conclusion of an Imperium that views humans as resources, measured, categorized, utilized according to optimal efficiency. I was a good soldier, competent, loyal. I'd served 9 years, survived 3 campaigns, never questioned orders. I'd believed, or pretended to believe, the propaganda about imperial glory and divine protection. I'd been exactly the kind of citizen the Imperium claims to value. Dutiful, obedient, willing to die for humanity's survival. And the Imperium responded by converting me into terror production machinery. Because my adrenal glands were superior. Because my suffering could be harvested. Because they'd calculated that I was more valuable as biological equipment than as a person. The mathematics were simple. The decision was rational. My consciousness was just externality. Unfortunate but irrelevant to the optimization equation. This is the Imperium's truth. You are components. Your value is measured in function. Your humanity is secondary to utility. And when the Imperium identifies ways to extract more value by destroying what makes you human, it will do so without hesitation because efficiency supersedes dignity every time. The Emperor protects. The Emperor is dead or dying, sustained by machinery, worshipped by delusion. If consciousness persists on the golden throne, it's probably like mine, trapped, harvested, utilized beyond any reasonable limit while priests call it sacred. We're mirrors. The Emperor protecting humanity by being consumed, me serving the Imperium by being harvested. Both trapped, both exploited, both called holy. The protection is a lie, always has been. The Imperium protects nothing except itself, grinds its own people into fuel and calls the grinding sacred, converts consciousness into resources and calls the process noble, creates horror systematically and calls it necessary. But is it necessary? That's the question that haunts forced clarity sessions. Are combat stimulants actually essential? Could the Imperium function without harvesting consciousness? Or is this just efficiency taken to logical extreme, not required for survival but implemented because the mathematics favor it? I don't know. Can't know. I'm just one component in an incomprehensibly vast system. Maybe biochemical warfare is critical. Maybe my suffering has genuinely contributed to humanity's survival. Maybe the 3,000 victories the Medici attributed to my production were real, meaningful, necessary. Or maybe they would have happened anyway. Maybe soldiers would have fought effectively without chemical enhancement. Maybe those victories were inevitable. Maybe my 13 years of horror accomplished nothing strategically significant and only made accountants happy that resources were utilized efficiently. I'll never know. We'll die without knowing if my suffering mattered, without confirmation that this served any purpose beyond someone's optimization metrics. That might be the cruelest part. Not the suffering itself. Suffering at least has the dignity of reality. But the uncertainty about whether it meant anything, whether any of this contributed to something valuable or was just waste given false purpose through imperial rhetoric. The priests say all suffering has divine meaning, that the emperor's plan requires every sacrifice, that nothing is wasted in his wisdom. But I know priests lie. No divine purpose is programming. No, that meaning is what we construct to make horror bearable, not what actually exists. So maybe my suffering meant nothing. Maybe I've spent 13 years in biochemical hell that accomplished nothing except checking optimization boxes. Maybe I'm about to die having served no genuine purpose, my consciousness destroyed for someone's efficiency report. Or maybe I saved thousands. Maybe soldiers lived because I died without dying. Maybe worlds were saved because my terror was bottled and distributed. Maybe my horror prevented greater horror. I don't know which is worse. Suffering meaninglessly or suffering for a cause that requires consciousness to be harvested. If my suffering was meaningless, then it was pure waste. If it was meaningful, then it was justifiable exploitation. Both conclusions are horrible. No answer provides comfort. What I do know, this is the Imperium. This is what humanity has become. Not noble, not glorious, not protected by divine authority. Just vast, grinding machinery that converts people into resources and calls the conversion service. Systems so complex that no one person controls them, so entrenched that no one can change them, so normalized that most citizens don't question them. I questioned them once, before my injury. Sitting with Harvin in trenches, discussing whether the Emperor actually existed, whether the wars made sense, whether we were dying for something real. I'd had doubts. Small ones. Carefully hidden, but present. The Imperium answered my doubts by proving them correct. Yes, the Emperor is propaganda. Yes, service is exploitation. Yes, humanity is just resource to be processed. You were right to doubt, and here's your reward for being right. 13 years as extraction unit. Consciousness preserved specifically to maximize suffering, harvested until biological failure. The system punishes understanding, rewards compliance, and calls itself holy while doing so. That's the philosophical synthesis. That's what 13 years in a vat has taught me. That's the meaning I've constructed from meaninglessness. The Imperium is a machine that consumes humans. It doesn't care if you're loyal or rebellious, faithful or skeptical, competent or incompetent. Just cares if you're useful, and it will use you until nothing remains. and it will call that use service. And most citizens will believe the lie because believing is easier than understanding. I understand now, fully, completely, with the clarity that comes from being consumed by the system you finally comprehended. And in 4 to 8 months, my understanding will be terminated, along with my consciousness, and the system will continue unchanged, and new soldiers will be processed using protocols refined on my suffering, and the Imperium will grind forward, consuming billions more, while priests preach protection and glory and divine purpose. Nothing I've learned matters. Nothing I've understood will change anything. My consciousness will end, and the horror will continue, and humanity will keep being processed into resources forever, until something destroys the Imperium or the Imperium destroys everything else. That's the truth. That's the synthesis. That's what existence as extraction unit teaches you if you remain conscious long enough to learn. The Emperor protects nothing. The Imperium grinds everything, and I'm ready to die. Year 14, Month 2, Day 0, Final Cycle. The Medicae gathered around my vat, instruments ready, procedures prepared. Unit 712. Krenn has reached terminal glandular failure. Cellular regeneration is no longer compensating for damage. Production has declined to 12% of baseline. Termination protocols approved. We'll harvest final outputs during the termination process itself. Dying biological systems produce unique biochemical profiles. Prepare collection systems. They were going to harvest me while killing me. Extract every last milliliter of terror as my consciousness dissolved. Efficient until the absolute end. I felt the final forced clarity chemicals entering my system. One last time, they gave me back full cognition. Returned language, memory, analytical thought. Made me Thaddeus Krenn again, completely, vividly, for the last time. This is your final cycle, the Medicae explained, his voice almost gentle. We're providing full awareness so your terminal response will be authentic. Facing death with complete understanding produces the highest grade stimulants. Your final production will enhance an entire company's combat effectiveness. You should be proud. Your service will be remembered. Remembered how? By whom? I'd be a line in facility records. Unit 712. Krenn, operational duration, 13.8 years. Total production, 967 liters. Cause of termination, natural glandular failure. Just data, just statistics. My consciousness would be reduced to numbers in archives no one would read. But I was aware now, fully aware. Could think clearly for the first time in months. Could remember everything, my life before, my injury, my selection, my processing, my years in amber fluid. Could understand completely what had happened and what was about to happen. I was Thaddeus Krenn. I'd been born on Mordian, raised to be a soldier, served in the Imperial Guard, been injured in combat, measured, selected, converted, harvested for 13 years, produced 967 liters of refined terror, enhanced 64,000 individual soldier combat performances, contributed to 3,000 Imperial victories. And now I was dying. The termination stimulation began. Different chemicals, designed to trigger maximum adrenal response while simultaneously inducing system failure. My glands activated one final time, flooding my system with hormones more intense than any previous cycle. My heart rate spiked. My remaining muscles seized. My consciousness filled with terrors more profound than anything I'd experienced. Not artificial fear, but genuine understanding that this was the end, that I was dying, that consciousness was about to cease. I wanted to live, desperately, irrationally. Despite 13 years of wanting death, when death arrived, every cell in my body rejected it. Wanted to continue, wanted to exist. Even existence as extraction unit was better than non-existence. My biology screamed. Even horror was better than oblivion. But choice wasn't involved. My adrenal glands ruptured. I felt them tear, felt something fundamental break inside my torso. The pain was extraordinary, not blocked by drugs this time, fully experienced. My heart spasmed. My lungs failed to inflate despite the breathing apparatus. Systems shutting down in cascade. Excellent final output, the decay reported. 429 milliliters of maximum purity terminal stimulant. This alone will enhance an entire platoon. Unit 712. Krenn has performed optimally until the absolute end. My vision darkened. Not physically. I'd long since stopped seeing in traditional sense. But consciousness darkened. Thoughts fragmenting. Coherence dissolving. The forced clarity fading as neural systems failed. My last thoughts, before language left entirely. I was Thaddeus Krenn. I was 28 when they took me. I'm 41 now, 13 years. Almost half my life spent in this vat. Was it worth it? Did I contribute? Did those 64,000 doses save lives that mattered? Or was I just processed because the system could process me? I'll never know. Dying without knowing. Dying without certainty. Just terminating because my glands failed and I'm no longer useful. The Emperor protects, they said. Lies. All lies. But maybe consciousness continues. Maybe something after. Maybe I'll find out if... The thoughts fragmented. Language dissolved. Just sensation remaining. Pain, fear, ending, darkness, fade, gone, gone. My last coherent awareness was ironic realization. I was experiencing exactly what 64,000 soldiers had injected. This terminal terror, this biochemical final moment, this horror of dying. I was feeling what I'd produced, what I'd given them, my gift to the Imperium. And then consciousness ended. Epilogue, the system continues. Processing Unit 7, Chamber 12. The vat stood empty for 47 minutes. Standard sterilization protocol after unit termination. The decay drained the amber fluid, removed the tubes, extracted the remains of what had been Corporal Thaddeus Krenn for post-mortem biological harvesting. Bone marrow, organ tissue, anything useful. The remains were processed into corpse starch, distributed to guard units for rations, components recycled completely. Nothing wasted. By hour 48, a new soldier was being prepared for installation. Guardsman Marcus Volgan, age 26, severely injured during combat on Stravos Prime. Adrenal function measured at 153% baseline. Superior specimen, premium candidate. You should be honored, the Medici explained as they wheeled him toward Chamber 12. You're replacing the facility's most successful extraction unit. 712 Krenn produced for nearly 14 years. Your service will be equally valuable. The Imperium requires combat stimulants, and you're ideally suited to provide them. Volgan tried to speak. Couldn't, already paralyzed. Just watched the ceiling pass overhead, watched the doors open to Chamber 12, watched the vat being prepared. He was lowered into the amber fluid, felt the tubes connecting, felt his body being integrated into machinery, felt the first stimulation cycle beginning, and started screaming. The Medicae nodded approvingly. Excellent initial response. Unit 712, Volgan, is now operational. Estimated service duration, 11 to 15 years. Beginning extraction cycle 1. In the adjacent vat, Unit 712, Marlid had been producing for 7 months. In the vat beyond that, 712 Kosan for 3 years. And beyond that, dozens more, hundreds throughout the facility, each one floating in amber fluid, each one experiencing biochemical horror, each one producing terror for warriors who'd never know their names. The cycle continued. The Imperium required stimulants. The facility provided. And somewhere in Imperial archives, a log entry was made. Unit 712, Krenn, terminated year 14, month 2, day 17. Total lifetime production, 967.3 liters refined combat stimulant. Operational duration, 13.8 years. Classification, premium producer, exemplary service. Protocols developed using this unit have been standardized across all processing facilities in segmentum obscurus. Contribution to Imperial military effectiveness. Significant. Replacement unit installed without interruption to production schedule. Just numbers. Just records. Just one more component, processed, utilized, and terminated in an Imperium that ground forward, consuming billions, forever, without end. And in the vat, Marcus Volgan experienced his 73rd extraction cycle, consciousness already fragmenting, identity already dissolving, humanity already becoming irrelevant. He'd learn what Thaddeus had learned. That service meant horror. That protection was lies. That the Emperor was corpse or propaganda or both. That consciousness was just another resource to be harvested. That suffering served the Imperium efficiently. That death would come eventually, years away, after producing hundreds of liters of refined terror for soldiers who'd inject it and fight and die and never know his name. That this was normal, expected, systematized. That this was the Imperium, and the cycle would continue. For him, for hundreds of others, for thousands more who'd be injured and measured and selected and processed. Forever, or until the Imperium fell, and the Imperium would not fall. So forever. The Emperor protects, the priests said. But in Chamber 12, in amber fluid, with tubes extracting biochemical horror, Marcus Volgan was learning the truth. The Emperor protects nothing. The Imperium grinds everything, and consciousness, once trapped, never escapes. Only ends. Eventually, after years. After producing, after serving the only way the Imperium allows the broken to serve. As resources, as components, as biological machinery experiencing its own exploitation. Forever.